a U.S. senator destroyed by blackmail.
He was not bound by the truth or by facts.
The country's most outrageous political demagogue ascending toward the peak of American power.
Millions upon millions of devoted followers.
This is a story of heroes willing to face down tyranny and the risk to the country if they fail.
Rachel Maddow presents Ultra, Season 2 of the chart-topping original podcast. Listen now.
Hello and welcome to Immigrantly. I'm Sadia Khan. Now, our frequent listeners know that I often explore the differences between individualistic and collectivist societies. This contrast is particularly evident in how people in individualistic cultures usually face grief and struggles alone. I'm pretty sure immigrants out there can deeply relate to the emotional toll this isolation brings and the critical role of community and support. Today's guest has explored these struggles through her Pulitzer Prize-winning play Cost of Living, which masterfully captures the complexities of human connection and the profound effects of isolation. Today's guest is Martina Mayak. As I mentioned, she is a 2018 Pulitzer Prize winner for her play Cost of Living. She's a graduate of the Yale School of Drama and Juilliard School. She's also attended University of Chicago and garnered accolades from the Kennedy Center, American Theater Critic Association, and many more. So without further ado, let's welcome Martina. How are you doing, Martina?
I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Where are you recording this from? I can see some stuff in the background, but I can't figure out where you are.
I'm in Manhattan. I'm in Washington Heights in my apartment.
Ah, nice. I like your apartment. I like the colors.
Thank you.
As I was prepping for this interview and I was doing research, I found out that you were born in Poland, but then you grew up in New Jersey and also in Chicago. Can you take us back to when your mom immigrated to the US and how old were you?
I always say that I was young because as soon as I put an age, I feel like people then define whether I'm enough of one thing or enough of another. And I find that so frustrating because I feel like when you live in multiple worlds, like people really want just one answer. I don't think that most people can fit into one answer, one box. But I was young. My mom and I came over together after the fall of the wall from Poland. And she left me in Poland first and came to America by herself to sort of scope it out and came back to Poland pregnant. Said, you, me, and this anchor baby are moving to America. She was a part of a large immigration from Eastern European countries after the fall of the Soviet Union. So there was a lot of people that were leaving the country, especially for places like Chicago and New York. So we moved together. My mom gave birth here. My sister was born in Newark. And my mom cleaned houses and worked with the elderly and worked in factories when she first got here. She still cleans houses and eventually worked for the post office. And I grew up in really multicultural, working class neighborhoods in North Jersey. So like Newark, Kearny, Harrison. I call it the end of the path train if you know New York. My understanding of America growing up was that everybody was from somewhere else. Outside in the world is America. And when you go into someone's house, it's Brazil or it's Puerto Rico or it's Dominican Republic or it's Poland. And you speak a different language at home than you do, at school. So I never felt like I was different. I may have been from Poland, whereas other people were from Mexico or Peru, but we all had commonalities in our neighborhood of either our parents English was their second language or we were immigrants ourselves. And that was how I understood America to be. And then Chicago is language school.
It's such a profound and beautiful description of America. And I wish more people saw America like that. So paint me a picture of your childhood, other than going to all these different homes and growing up in a multicultural environment. how was school? What were you interested in?
I went to a public school. I went to public schools growing up, and I loved anything creative. I also really loved validation. So I was like, when I was like, oh, I think I'm good at these things, and started getting positive attention, I think that fed a desire for me to keep pursuing them. Growing up was not easy, I guess, but it was all I knew. So that's maybe no one's growing up is easy. I was living with a lot of domestic violence for many years when we first came to the country from my stepfather. And we didn't have much money. And the money that we did have was largely controlled by him. And so we weren't able to go back to Poland as often as I think my mom would have liked, because there were legality issues. There was the fear that, my stepfather could report her for working under the table or try to keep my sister away from her. So he blackmailed her and was very controlling, and that kept her in a really scared place. I think growing up, I was always hyper aware of precarity. Also, when I was a kid, when I was less than 2 years old, when we were still in Poland, we think that I may have been affected by Chernobyl.
Oh.
I was camping with my family by the Ukrainian border, and the cloud had passed over us. All my baby teeth turned black and disintegrated. And so we don't know if it was Chernobyl, because there's so many things that haven't been investigated about the health effects of Chernobyl. But it was closely aligned. But ironically, my mother came to America for healthcare, which that's hilarious.
Yeah, coming to the US for that, right?
I know. No. I was at the dentist all the time. I was at the doctor often, and trying to keep myself and my sister and my mom safe. But I also loved school, and school felt like a safe place for me. I had a lot of friends. I was like a very active, athletic kid, and I just liked making things with other people. So I think that kept me psychically safe.
And Martina, you also liked theater, right? The first time you went and watched it was at 17? And you had saved some money?
Yeah, I used to hustle at a pool hall, and I'd win money playing pool. And so I won $45 one time, which was more than I'd ever won. And my mom, when she would clean houses, she'd bring home pamphlets and magazines that people were leaving out for recycling. She'd bring that home for me and my sister because she figured it's free reading material. And one day she brought a pamphlet for something called Cabaret. I didn't know what it was, and she didn't know what it was, but John Stamos was in it from Full House. And so she said, Uncle Jesse's in New York. And I had no idea what it was. But I'd grown up watching Full House as a latchkey kid, all my life. And I was like, I just was compelled to I was like, the cheapest tickets were $45. So I was like, this is the sign. And I saw it at Studio 54, and it was just the most moving experience. And I had up to that point of being in a theater full of these animated, alive people that were telling a story that was funny and bawdy and sexy and all of these wonderful things, and still being generous and inviting me. The first song is Literally Welcome. And I just felt like they wanted me there, and also didn't compromise what the story was about. It's a dark story, but it still was able to tell itself with this generosity. And there was something that happened to me watching that I want to do to other people what this is doing to me right now, and started sort of pursuing theater.
And you did. You pursued theater. You went to University of Chicago, great school. You went on scholarship. Talk to me a little bit about your years there.
I loved all the schools I went to because I love school, but it definitely was shocking to go to a school where most of the students were so much wealthier than I. And I didn't realize just how poor I was until I got to that school. I was like, I knew I had less money than some of the kids in the neighborhood, but it became really apparent when I went to the school, just sort of what opportunities other people have had or they have taken for granted or just assumed to be, the norm for most people. And that was kind of devastating. I felt like I could see that some people just had access to more life because they had more money. And I just thought that was what a limiting thing for life. We only have one, and the time is so finite that if you have a certain amount of money, you can just live more. And why wasn't I worth that? And a lot of things happened for me in college. And it was an opportunity for me to see where I came from, the violence and the immigration issues I had growing up that I had to process. I started being very destructive toward myself, and eventually found the theater and found writing. It wasn't therapy's therapy, but there was some part of processing some of the things that I think are within that we don't necessarily want to look at all the time because, it keeps us safe not to look at these things all the time. But I got to kind of commune with it in writing and in conversation with actors and collaborators. in a way that it did something to me where I felt like I could move forward and share with other people and they could relate to it. And I felt a little bit less alone, I think, by sharing some of these things, and that helped.
And you've had influences, people who have really shaped how you look at theater and how you look at writing. You have talked about in your previous interviews how discovering Sarah Kane, another playwright, while you were at University of Chicago, made you feel like a whole new world was opening. Can you paint a picture of what the world looked like to you at that time, and how did exposure to this particular playwright change it for you?
I think a large part of it also just had to do with that she was a woman. And I picked up this book that a young woman had written about her darkness and sadness and yearning. And somebody made this book, and the people know her, people have read it, and it's sort of similar to Cabaret, where I was reading things that were seemingly difficult. I say seemingly because when I first writing my plays and sharing what the topics were, people would get really nervous.
Why?
Because I would say, well, this is a story about an immigrant woman who goes through domestic violence and economic disparity.
Not exactly the American dream that people think it is, right?
Yeah. It's a story about two couples, one of which is disabled. And even just that, people assume a certain type of tone with those types of stories, which is not the tone that I approach them with. These are the people that I grew up with, people versions of myself that I have been. And I find beauty and humor in them, but that's not, I think, what most people assume they're going to receive in these sorts of stories. And so I think it was, Sarah Kane's plays are a lot, I'd say, there's humor in them, but I think they're maybe less typically humorous, like you wouldn't call them comedies for sure, or even dramatic comedies, so definitely dramas. But it was, I think, so important to see somebody who had brought forth something that it was difficult. It seems difficult for them to hold on to, and that there was space for other people to also hold that. Just that act itself was really moving, and that it was a woman, and that the world also similarly didn't compromise their darkness and difficulty, but there was still love. They all ended in some little tiny bit of hope. There's somebody striving towards something, toward connection in some way, and that felt really palpable and resonated with me.
Where do you still see her influences in your work? Do you connect more with hope or despair?
Oh, hope all the time. I mean, I don't know how I get up in the morning if I didn't have hope. It's a journey sometimes through a lot of darkness, but I think there's always this expectation maybe that there's something good, or at least if you lead with good, that something good will come back to you. I wonder now if I'd read her plays, if I'd be quite as affected. Maybe there's something about getting older that you're just so much more aware of mortality, and just it's more and more difficult to look in the face of the depth of what life can get to you. But her poetry would still resonate with me. Her sort of beautiful, elegant economy of stage pictures and stage directions and just words, these beautiful, economical, poetic words that are active and muscular, but they're so hard-hitting. Yeah, I think I love that about her world.
Martina, this is a good segue into your play, Cost of Living. And a lot of people may think it's about, this relationship between disabled and abled people. But I've listened to quite a few of your interviews where you talk about how this is a snapshot of your life in that period, in that moment. You were struggling with poverty, you had lost your job, you were in New York. New York is not an easy place in many ways. People think, it's a great place to hustle, but there's a lot more to it than that. And you've created these very interesting characters. But you also say something subtly, though. You are, in a way, holding mirror to America's individualistic traits, because there is so much focus in the US as a society to be self-sufficient and to be able to take care of oneself, almost undermining human connection and interdependence. That's so important. But you do explore and investigate that through your play. So can you talk a little bit about how these characters came about, and how does this play, in a way, hold America accountable to its own individualistic ideas of existence?
I love that encapsulation. Thank you. That's what I didn't realize that the play was going to be about, was our need for each other. I think that that whole pull yourself up by your own bootstraps mentality. Where no one's an island. We depend on one another. We have to. What I've seen growing up is when a country doesn't take care of its citizens, it puts a lot of pressure on the relationships of the citizens to do the care that a system or a world will not do for them. So, and that can put a lot of pressure on relationships in ways that like is very unfair for those relationships. It puts a lot more work when you're not quite sure if you can go to the doctor. You're not, there's nobody there that's gonna cook a meal for you if you can't afford food. The government's not going to take care of you. But yet at the same time, it's your fault if you don't attain the heights that other people have achieved while not looking at the fact that nobody starts out in a level.
Yeah.
No one starts out equally with the same opportunities or limitations, but yet we're all judged by the same metrics of whether we've achieved these tangible dreams of like owning property or having really resplendent Instagram profiles, or we get to go on vacations, or like look beautiful and young forever and always, like show off the money and like comfort that we've achieved with our hard work. Like, yes, when I'm asked about the American dream, I always think about how the idea that, if you just work hard enough, you should be able to achieve it.
It's so messed up.
It's so messed up. And it's so toxic because I look at my mom who cleaned houses for her whole life. And nobody can tell me she didn't work hard enough to achieve a level of safety. I dare a banker to come and look at my mother in the eye and say she didn't work hard enough.
Exactly. Exactly.
Like, how dare you? But we still hold that within ourselves, that same kind of metric of a barometer of whether we've achieved our dreams, when it brings us to so much shame. And everyone's saying, they didn't work hard enough. They didn't pull themselves up. They had all these opportunities, but like, you don't know. And they may not have had the same ones as you did. And I think about that with healthcare in this country as well. Like, who has access to go to the doctor, to a good doctor, to a doctor who cares? It's Hunger Games.
It is Hunger Games. Oh my God, that's aptly described. You're absolutely right.
And one little break, and that's it. I mean, I remember being in certain like health situations or housing situations where one break, somebody doesn't like you for a day, and they all of a sudden you're out of their favor and you are homeless, or you can't get the right kind of care. You can't pay for that. Like the hospital bill comes and you're like, what are you going to do? Do you say no to certain care that you need? For so many people in America, the potential to lose everything in an instant is so close. I saw that for many people. I felt that I've lived that in moments, and I feel okay, quote unquote. I feel like safer than I ever have, but I am always thinking that in any moment, like catastrophe is happening tomorrow. Every time I say no to a job, I think, what hubris? How dare you? Who do you think you are? Like, naturally, the world's going to come crumbling down for you tomorrow, and then you'll be sad that you said no to that job. And like, I don't know that will ever leave my brain, and I'm interested in what the like capitalist bootstraps mentality does to the psychology of a person, what that means to feel safe. Like, they carry that for the rest of their lives.
Do you ever feel guilty of achieving what you have achieved versus everybody else around you? Because I've seen a lot of people, when they struggle and they achieve a certain level of success as you have, there is this sense of guilt. You talk about your mom and you talk about her in such an endearing way. Have you ever felt guilty about, I have achieved this, but my mother was not able to do that? It's almost just like one generation removed privilege, right?
Oh, I always get goosebumps when I think about it. It's just kind of survivor's guilt, I think, sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, I'm so aware of the sacrifices that, like, I see it in her body. I'm just like the stooped over, like the ways that she maybe will choose the cheaper option of a meal that's less healthy. These little tiny ways of not prioritizing oneself because the world hasn't prioritized you, or the world hasn't made you feel welcome and loved in ways that it has for other people. And then it just manifests in like the way that the choices that you're making about your own. And I still do that for myself too. I know that I am incredibly lucky. One of my closest friends was undocumented, and he should have achieved the greatest of great heights, but wasn't able to get financial aid to go to the universities that he wanted to go to. Like, that is just deeply unfair. That is somebody who's made a policy based on where somebody was born that limits the capacity of achievement for their finite life. Like, what the fuck?
You're right. Even on this podcast, we talk about race and racial identity, culture, language, accent. But what gets pushed aside is socioeconomic dynamics, right? Where you're coming from, what situation are you coming to in the US? That defines, in most instances, your trajectory to success or failure.
Mm-hmm.
And there are outliers like yourself, but not many. And that goes back to how American Dream, this idea, this interesting experiment is sold, right? Whoever is behind the PR that's behind the American Dream ideation did a
really
great job. I mean, come on. We need that PR, right? I do want to circle back to cost of living. Now, listening to one of your interviews, I found out that you created all these different scenes separately. So they were almost disparate, and then you brought them together. When you brought them together, was there something that surprised you about how all these different pieces came together? Would you change anything if you were to go back and rewrite the process?
I feel like every process ends up being different. And I love this Leonard Cohen quote that goes, if I knew where the good songs come from, I'd go there more often. Every time I've tried to replicate a process that's worked, it's like the fates of art making laugh in my face and say, like, no, you have to do this afresh. You have to sort of learn to write anew with each story, because the story has something different to tell you. And so if you walk the same path, you're going to miss what the story's trying to tell you. The real practical reason that they were disparate pieces was because I had just moved to New York and I didn't have stable housing. I hopped between 13 different apartments in a year, all sublets, because I didn't have enough for a security deposit when I first moved, when I graduated from grad school, which also on scholarship. Like, I saved money, but it just wasn't enough. And I was so sure, like, I'll just, it'll be like maybe a month or two, I'll make enough working in a bar or a restaurant to save enough money. But it wasn't. I guess things kept breaking. And then the second month in, I got bed bugs, like everything. I guess I feel like I got hazed by New York City. You want to pursue your dreams, like locusts, plagues. So because I was working a lot just to survive, I didn't have much headspace or literal space to write. So I would do these short pieces because I'd still feel guilty about, I moved to New York to be a writer, but you're not writing. So I have to find some way to do that, even if it meant sometimes that I was writing 10 pages in the bathtub, because that's where the bed bugs could get to at night while I was waiting to figure out where my next sublet was going to be. And I feel like every play ends up being a time capsule of, whether consciously or not, of sort of where you were at the time that you were writing it. And there's no way for me to sort of transplant myself back to that in that same way of generating those scenes. But later on, we did the first production in 2016, then 2017 was New York. And Broadway was October 22, mostly because the pandemic kicked it down the road. My rewriting process is finding opportunities. I feel like the first draft is like a skeletal hypothesis, and in conversation with other people and watching what actors do and being inspired by their choices and some of their questions, I find places where I could fill something out or complicate something, or I discover something about a character or that I knew, but it wasn't in the script. And so I'm going to share it with other people. So I still made changes for the Broadway production that were just sort of like kind of expansions of moments, but the core of it stayed the same. I feel like at a certain point, once like a play has left you, once you've birthed it, and it's got like feet and hands and legs, then you can just like change the hair. You can like give it a different hairstyle. But, like,
and it's a beautiful play. I mean, it's a Pulitzer Prize-winning play.
Yeah, thanks.
I started reading it, and one of your characters is Eddie, an unemployed truck driver. And he says something in the opening of the play, and I quote, "The shit that happens is not to be understood." That's from the Bible. "The shit that happens to you is not to be understood," unquote. I want to expand on this a little bit. Who is meant to understand what Eddie is going through?
I feel like all of us. When I first started writing that piece, I was thinking a lot about my close family members who just passed away in Poland. Among the things I could not pay for during that time was definitely not plane tickets to go. and say goodbye. And I think also a part of me didn't want to go and say goodbye because then it would be real.
Yeah.
If I didn't attend the funeral, it could be like, just we just haven't talked for a long time, and they could still be alive somewhere that I just haven't visited for some time. And I felt like that state of grief was a lot of me sort of hoping and searching for miracles or some kind of sign that there might be something more beyond. Like I desperately wanted to see this person's ghost. I thought, they wouldn't give you a visa, but maybe they'll give your ghost one. And I'll see you here somewhere. I just wanted to feel like there was more. I think that state of grief and yearning for miracles, I felt most close to that character than any of the others when I was writing it, because I was going through the sadness of having lost somebody and regret of the things that weren't said or the things that were just left unfinished. The opening monologue is him telling the story of he gets a text. He's been texting his deceased wife, and one day he gets a text back and realizes, they've given away her number. She's gone. But then this person keeps texting him back to meet up. And so he thinks, you know what? I know this isn't my wife, but there must be something. And so he goes to a bar he assumes it's a her. It could be a guy.
Why not?
Why not? Like he's just basically imagine like if it's his wife or not, it's maybe somebody who's going to make this pain more manageable and connect in some way and take care of him as a human being in the ways that he feels the world is not taking care of him right now. And so I think the text is the shit that happens not to be understood, but also the play then goes to meet we go back in time to look at their relationship, him and his wife, and another relationship of caregiving, which is it's a work relationship of a younger couple, quote unquote couple. And they intersect in a way that feels like a little bit of a miracle. When one of these people needed it the most, when two of them needed it the most, like there was connection. And so I think that there's this cosmic destiny, I guess, of our connecting to one another that we so desperately need. That is sort of our life source that goes very contradictory to this idea of the individualistic push with our own bootstraps, and you just do it by yourself because no one does it by themselves.
Now, Martina, you do write characters that are not from communities you may be part of or you may be aware of. How do you avoid flattening those characters?
Anybody who I've written has had a basis in somebody that I knew or some aspect of them. I was a caregiver. I used to work for 2 men with disabilities. So if I've not had an experience, I've had a close relationship with somebody who's had a certain kind of experience. But I never say that I'm writing about an identity or an experience, because one, it's just, imagine if I am an immigrant, but imagine if I was saying I'm writing about immigration. There's just so many, like you said it earlier, you're like, depending on who you came with, your status, like your age, your education level. There's so many different versions. I in no way purport to say that I'm like an expert about any sort of, including things that I embody myself. I am inspired by people, by people, the way people speak, by people's circumstances, and I put little bits of people that I know or versions of myself that I've been in characters to make them feel alive to me, so that in the writing of them, I've created some sort of quote representation of what an identity is supposed to be. I just don't think that any one of us is already one thing. Like I said earlier, it's just we're all characters. We're all sort of the heroes of our own narratives.
Yeah.
And I write character forward that also happen to be XYZ. It definitely defines their lives. For example, in my other play, Sanctuary City, I have 2 undocumented characters, which their status literally defines what they can do with their lives.
Absolutely.
And so, like, it is their character, but it's also their, I don't know if you want to call it an identity, but a circumstance that I think that we have a lot more similarities than we have dissimilarities. And our dissimilarities should be highlighted and shown and given beautiful specificity so that somebody can enter into our world. But my hope is that somebody's watching these stories and seeing their stories in a very, very different body, potentially, than their own.
Yeah.
Like I, in Cabaret, felt welcomed into an experience.
That makes so much sense. Do you remember the first play you wrote, unpublished or published?
Oh, it was horrible.
Oh, it was?
It was bad, of course. Oh, my God. I think I still have it. It was one of my English teachers, I think, she asked me to write a play for this competition. I didn't know what a play was. I thought it was a movie you couldn't afford to make, which, is not true. This is not an untrue thing.
In some ways, yes.
Yeah. And so I think I kind of tried to write a movie, but it was like, I think it was about like systemic racism. It was a love story of like star-crossed lovers who couldn't be together because their families were trying to keep them apart because one was white and one was black, and like, probably melodramatic.
But why do you think it was bad?
Maybe it wasn't bad. I think it was probably, I know it was very naive, I'm sure, because I thought I was writing a movie. Lots of special effects that the stage could not handle. So it was naive, but I think I was dating somebody from a different race than then I was like, and also I was like in 7th grade. We dated young, 8th grade. I don't know. It was young, but like, that's what was on my mind. That's what I was thinking about. And it found its way in this very, very probably melodramatic.
I'm fascinated by how much you draw from your own experiences. But that's not easy, right? Drawing on your own experiences, revisiting, interrogating, exploring your life yourself. What is the most challenging part of doing that? And what is the most rewarding part?
I wish I was a different type of writer. I wish I could just research something and feel compelled enough to, it doesn't do it for me.
Mm-hmm.
If I haven't lived some aspect of it, it just feels academic, at least for me. Other people can do it, and I admire that, but I have a hard time.
I hear you.
I think the most difficult thing is the exposure. So I don't even know sometimes it's in a play until opening night. It's really, I think I'm writing a play about this, and I'm like, oh no, it's about that other thing, actually. You can't hide from yourself in writing. If it's good writing, you shine through whether you want to or not. Yeah. And that's, sometimes can be really embarrassing or exposing. Or when I'm workshopping and developing plays, I try not to say what's autobiographical, because I want the actors to feel like they have free reign to ask all the questions about the play. If I say like, oh, it's based on my life, they might feel censored or hindered in some way to ask questions, because they'll feel like, oh, it's really, sensitive. But I don't want them to. I want to be generous with it and say it's a story. And also, a lot of them, it's not documentary theater. I'm not trying to get at like what exactly was the true thing that happened, but rather what was the emotional truth of what this experience is like, that hopefully other people share in their very specific ways that might not look like that. So the past few years, I've really struggled to write an original play, because a lot of it was also the pandemic. Like, the pandemic happened and I didn't know how to respond to that in the moment. And so I started doing adaptations, and that let me access something really personal with a mask of something else. So like, I just did an adaptation of The Great Gatsby as a musical. We just opened it last week. It's called Gatsby. And I'm all over that narrative. I feel deeply exposed, but in a safe way.
Ah.
One of my friends came to a reading, and she goes, whatever they're paying you, it's not enough. Like, this is your whole story. I feel like I find myself in a lot of these characters. It helped me process the pandemic. The story of The Great Gatsby takes place 4 years after the end of a world war and a pandemic that collectively killed a third of the world. And when I learned that, and I thought about the Gatsby's parties and the gin, and I was like, this makes absolute sense to me. Everyone is trying to find some kind of meaning for the death and destruction that they've witnessed and feel alive. And it's making some of them like feral, hungry people trying to pursue this idea of a dream that they've been promised. It gave me like a little home to be able to create within, where I didn't feel so exposed, and so that I felt safe and could go to the kind of darker, scarier places, emotionally, and then share that through writing. And I guess the answer is the same for both. Like, what's the most rewarding? What's the most? It's that it is so exposing, and you have processed something that is so meaningful to you that you have to create fake characters and write them down, and fit them into an arc for other people. There's something churning inside you so loudly that needs expression in this very strangely specific way, that I know that going through the process of writing and putting up a play gets me to a fuller version of my life and my view of the world than I ever would have if I hadn't gone through that process, by the end, the plays are smarter than I ever was. And they tell me what I needed to look at, and they tell me what was important and what I needed to spend some time with. And so it is like the most rewarding. I feel like so emotional. It's the most rewarding thing. And I don't know what my life would be if I didn't get to do this.
But what's next?
On a lot, actually.
Okay, so there are two things.
Yeah.
First, the minute I said what's next, I cringed because I realized, okay, this is quintessential capitalism. The minute you deliver something, I'm like, oh, so what's next? What else are you doing? Not saying take a break, forget about what you are doing next, just chill, just, connect with family, with friends. But this is what capitalism does. So I don't know if I should take this question back or still ask you.
I feel like that was like an old version of myself where I go, oh God, the pressure, needing to constantly be I think, I need to get a second Pulitzer because the first one was clearly an accident. Like somebody made a mistake. And if I get a second one, then it's really real. That thinking doesn't stop. But it's also, I joke about it now, but it's also so detrimental. Like I needed to achieve and attain and have these tangible like awards or things to show like my life matters. Yeah. And now I am expanding that to also include love. Like you said, seeing friends and seeing family and being with my love, like making a home, things like that I now make more space for than I used to, partly because I'm more able to from like the sort of relentless work up front. But it doesn't mean that the work has stopped. Like that, I have another musical that I'm going into a workshop for next month. Gatsby will probably be doing another workshop as well before it moves to Broadway. My first screenplay was just shot in spring, and so that's in post-production. I'm going to be looking at the edits of that. I'm doing an adaptation of Cost of Living as a film that I'll be writing. And I have a number of commissions for new plays that I have to do, including one for the Guggenheim.
Oh, wow.
That I gotta get on.
Martina, in the end, if you were to define the United States of America in a word or a sentence, how would you do that?
Okay, I wish I could say the green light. to give it a Gatsby reference. Maybe I'll make the word yearning. It's between yearning and striving.
I love that. This was so good. Thank you so much
for
being on Immigrantly. It was so much fun. I mean, this interview was so refreshingly honest and fun. I'm glad we were able to do this. And thank you for coming. People know who you are and what your work is. But for those who don't, where can they find your work? Is there a website they can go to?
My work is on martynamark.com, MartynaMajok. And my plays are published by TCG and DPS. I'm sure they're on Amazon and all these sorts of, or maybe they're also in small little bookstores. And then productions happen sort of across the country and beyond. So it's looking at, what your local theater might be doing. And I hope that you like it.
Thank you so much, Martina. This was wonderful.
Thank you for having me on.
You know what I love about Immigrantly Conversations, and I know you may think I'm biased, maybe I am, but it's the truth, is sheer honesty of guests, vulnerability, deep conversations, and yet conversations that don't weigh you down. This one is one of those conversations. I am so glad I was able to sit down with Martina. She was so refreshingly honest. Something that I really, really appreciate in all our guests. So if you like this podcast episode, please rate it, give it a 5-star review, share it with a friend. These conversations are so important, and these conversations do not happen often. This episode was produced by me, Sadia Khan, written by Renee Harris and me. The editorial review is done by Shay Yu. Our sound designer and editor is Hazik Ahmed Farid. Theme music is done by Simon Hutchinson. Other music is by Epidemic Sound. Don't forget to subscribe to our Apple Podcasts channel. That's how you support our work. Show us some love. Take care and come back next week.